Hello, everybody. This is Dan Liebenson, and I am here with B'nai Lappi for I believe it is the fifth episode of this show, the Oral Talmud. B'nai, great to be back with you.
So great to be back. Thank you so much.
Great. Yeah. And so last week we had our first guest, who was Professor David Kramer of the Jewish Theological Seminary. And I just want to give everybody an update. I mean, the in the times in which we live, meaning this century, but even more so in this particular time in which we're living, this coronavirus period. So just a little word of introduction, and then I'll turn it over to you, B'nai, that we studied last time the famous story of the oven of Achnai, which you're going to recap. So anybody who wasn't there last week, you're going to get a brief recap of that story. And today we're going to look at the continuation of the story. This is found in Bava Metzia, page 59b. And there is a Sefaria source sheet, which is linked to on the website for this show, which is www.jewishlive.org/oral Talmud. And you can find the link to the Sefaria source sheet there. And in just a moment, it'll also be in the description on Facebook. And so you can follow along with the text. You would scroll all the way down the source sheet because we're adding each new show's text at the bottom. So
It's so difficult to talk about these stories. It's a little bit like playing three-dimensional chess. Anytime you talk about the story, it unnecessarily raises the shopkeeper's hopes, and it gives a number of examples of ways that we can use words to harm. And the the Gemara, the explicating, expansive, challenging, complicating text that existed for 400 years, after 500 years or so after this first level of Mishnah, um, finally impurity is really even possible for an item that is a vessel that is whole. Well, what if they ask you, take a vessel that was whole and you chop it up into pieces and then you glue it back together? Is this now a whole item susceptible to ritual impurity or not? That's kind of the driving question, which is not completely relevant to the story, but it drives the action forward. And then we have this dispute between Rabbi Eliezer and the other sages. And Rabbi Eliezer tries to convince the other sages that such an oven is to impurity, and no matter how many dead creepy crawlies crawl into your oven and land on top of your food, you can still eat your food because your oven's not going to be impure, your food's not going to be impure, and this is an impurity proof oven. I'm sure it sold really well. It would sell really well. Okay, so Rabbi Eliezer brings all the arguments, all the rational arguments in the world to prove to his colleagues around the table in the Beit Midrash that it is in fact impervious to impurity, and they dismiss all of his arguments. Finally, he resorts to supernatural comes down and says, what's your problem with Rabbi Eliezer? He's right. He's not only right here, every time he makes a decision, he's right. He's conveying my will. So what's the problem here? And Rabbi Yehoshua stands up and he says, God, sit down. You gave us the Torah. You told us it's not in heaven, and we should do with it what we want, which is his interpretation of what God said, not at all what it's not in heaven meant. And you told us to go with the majority. We're the majority. You and Rabbi Eliezer are in the minority. P.S. He's just quoting a verse in the Torah that says, actually, don't go with the majority. And we get sort of the postscript at this point in the story that says, God smiled and was like, nice one. Nice one. So the rabbis seem to have conjured a God who now approves of being cut out of the equation. And at this point in the story, we have this shift. It's like a snapshot of the shift in Jewish history from us following what God wants us to do to us saying, you know what? God, thanks, God, your job is over. We're now stepping up to the plate. Okay, that's where we enter our story today.
Okay, and one thing that I want to note from our conversation last time, which I think is really important, is that we started exploring this idea that if the rabbis, if the Talmud are saying that even if you hear the voice of God, meaning the voice that in the Torah is definitive, right? In the previous form of Judaism is definitive, that voice that says, I self am telling you what the truth is, that there comes a time when we say, like you said, sit down, thanks, but no thanks. We're ready for something else. And that if we transpose that onto the rabbi's own Judaism, that the version of the voice of God is the person who says, but I looked it up in the book and it says exactly what the halacha is, what to do. It says it right here in the book. We now here in the 21st century on the cusp of the third era of Judaism, coronavirus, whatever we want to call it. Thanks very much. I know that that's what the halacha says. I know that that's what the old way said was the right way, but there's a reason why that's not the right way anymore. And I'm not hiding that. I'm not saying, oh, I can explain to you away why it's wrong. It's like, no, I acknowledge that this is the voice of the past, and it's telling us that the right decision is the opposite of what we're doing. And we're going to say, sorry, we don't listen to that anymore. And the reaction of God is, my children, you got me, like, right, and smiled. And so that the reaction of these rabbis who wrote this story, ostensibly to, under the right circumstances, what we might do would be to smile and say, you got me, or it's not even, not so much you got me, it's my children have overcome me, my children, I mean, nitzchuni banai, the Hebrew, you could translate it as my children have defeated me. That's how it's usually. But it's interesting to translate it a little bit like my children have overcome me, or have advanced beyond me. I mean, there are ways that we might translate that in ways that say, like, it's not about a fight. It's about a progression. It's about my children have grown up. My children have, right. And so, and I would also remind folks, I don't think we talked about this 2 weeks ago, but we talked about it a month or two ago when you were on the Judaism Unbound podcast, or we were recording this pre-Passover episode. And, we talked about that maybe there's certain traditions like Shabbat that we have weekly, and there's certain traditions like Passover that we have annually. And maybe there's certain traditions like remaking Judaism that we have every 2,000 years. And it's a tradition. And we had use it all the time. Sometimes society needs to be stable. It's destabilizing. But
and it's not only destabilizing, it's destabilizing in a good way. And as you say, it's destabilizing. Last week, who kal v'chomer to them. If they can do it, so can we. And it's really a text of terror, to use Phyllis Tribble's term. It's a little bit scary to know that you can kick out God out of the equation, and whatever you say goes. There's a heavy responsibility and a danger and a scariness. And I think the second part of the story is really about the risk and the danger, what's at stake, and what do we need to watch out for when we do act the way the first part of the story suggests we might.
Go into the text. Still, but I love feedback. I'm trying to figure out on this, when we read the text, should we be sharing the screen? Would you rather see our faces reading the text? Would you rather actually see the text? It's kind of hard to see on a small screen, so I'm not totally sure. We'll go back and forth sharing the text. If you're listening to this at some point later on the audio, you could just skip this part. It's not relevant to you. But I also want to acknowledge, B'nai, that because you, as my teacher, I both have the utmost respect for your feelings, and at the same time I am a little bit doing the I'm not listening to you part, because I know it causes you some pain to read the text the way that I want to do, which is like quickly, with no, not lingering over every word, and not in the original. And I want to say that I appreciate that you're willing to do it.
That too is traditional.
Right. So let's look at it. So this is the part of the text that comes immediately after the story, right? So immediately after the story is that basically Rabbi Eliezer has been defeated, basically, even though he brought the voice of God in, and the rabbis rule against him, and they basically say that the thing that he wanted to say was pure is impure. And then there's this whole story about how did God react? God laughed and smiled and said, "My children have defeated me, overcome me." And it says, it was said, I'll share the screen for now. It was said, on that day, or that very same day, the sages, right, the same day that this all happened, that very same day, the sages brought all the ritually purified, in quotes, the things that Rabbi Eliezer said were ritually pure, but they actually weren't, according to this ruling, and burned them in a fire. And they reached a consensus about him and blessed him, which is a euphemism for they excommunicated him. So I want to stop there. Yeah.
Let's stop there for a second, because to deny the validity of everything that Rabbi Eliezer declares to be one way is a very big action. That's a big thing to do. To sort of, I don't know if I'm overly getting drashy here, but they're basically overturning Rabbi Eliezer's word, kicking him along with God out of the conversation and overturning his work. They're basically saying everything you did is invalid, and they essentially excommunicate him. They banish him, which is they put him in a halachic category of, you're out of the conversation here. It's a big move.
Yeah, and it seems harsh. I mean, like that's the piece. Like it seems very, very harsh, and that's where I start. I mean, like it's because I have there are two ways that I'm sort of reading Rabbi Eliezer, and this is I wanted to discuss. This is why I framed it a little bit about the characters, because this is a very human story. What we've just read and what we're going to read, that a man who made a mistake. I mean, maybe he didn't even make a mistake. He was deemed by his colleagues to have been mistaken, but it was a legitimate point of view for sure.
That, not only legitimate, God says he's right.
Right.
Right with capital F. He was right.
Right. He was right. He was right. I mean, like you can look. I mean, there's an important, and I'm sure that we'll study it at some point. But there's an important story. It's not a story. There's an important I don't know what you would call it exactly in the Talmud, where it explains why the law is always decided according to Hillel and not Shammai. And the bottom line of it is, or part of the bottom line is that they were both right. They were both the words of God, but there's a reason why the law is decided according to Hillel. Okay, that's fine. You want to decide the law according to one way for a certain reason, but it didn't say that Shammai was excommunicated. Didn't say that everything that Shammai declared was pure was burned in a fire. I mean, this is basically taking somebody and saying, it's not, you didn't make a mistake. God agreed with you, but we've decided to sort of move in a different direction. So we're taking basically everything that you've ever created, and we are burning it. I mean, we are stamping, we are getting completely rid of it.
Yeah, and the traditional read of the story is that they did that in front of him. In other words, they did it right in front of him, like they rubbed his nose in it.
Right, and not only that, but biased because I was the translator, but there's a novel called The Orchard by Yochi Brandis, which I think does an amazing job of sort of humanizing the rabbis. And it actually, for me, it changed my orientation completely towards the Talmud, because I was finally able to track these rabbis, and that when I was reading it before, they were just names, and I wouldn't even realize that it was the same Rabbi Eliezer that said this and that said that. And that story helped me put it all together. And Rabbi Eliezer is just a tragic figure, and he's just completely excommunicated and shunned, and it just seems so tragic in the story, and then in real life, when you read a story like this, which I don't think I was fully aware of until I started working on that. Right, everybody knows the first part of the story. It tends not to be trotted out, this latter part of the story.
Right.
And so it's just shocking, right? That he I mean, to the extent that I knew that he was excommunicated, but the idea that they burned everything that he had, they burned his life work, basically, it's shocking.
Yeah.
So,
okay, and this sort of lower form of excommunication called nidui, this banishment, means you can't come. He couldn't teach anymore. His students couldn't come close to him. It was a very emotional and physical and very real isolation of him.
Right. He couldn't even change his mind and say, okay, now I want back in. He was out. He was thrown out of the whole project. Now, here's what I want to put on the two Rabbi Eliezer is and who the other characters, because initially my thought about Rabbi Eliezer, and you and I talked about this, I think largely off the air, but I was saying that Rabbi Eliezer is not the conservative, intransigent, the person. He's not a priest. He's not a Sadducee, meaning a supporter of the priests. He is one of the rabbis. He's in fact one of the two great students of the perhaps founder of Rabbinic Judaism, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. And so he is basically, I don't know, I think, did I say this on the air? He's like Pete Buttigieg in the sense that he's a Democrat, but he's a more conservative kind of a Democrat, as opposed to Bernie Sanders, who's also sort of a Democrat and the more liberal kind of a Democrat. And so it's kind of like, as opposed to George W. Bush or Dick Cheney or someone who is a Republican. So it's not that that Rabbi Eliezer is a conservative. He is just a conservative-leaning liberal.
He's a conservative radical. He's a radical with a different approach, actually. Mm-hmm. And I think part of his radicalness is being able to be more... He has literal reads which allow him to be more lenient than you could imagine. That what he does is show the degree to which staying very close to a simple read of the text actually allows you more flexibility than you would imagine, and a flexibility which you actually don't need to depart from the text to do. Anyway, he's just got a different radical approach.
Right. So one thing to point out about this, because I think that this rings true to me, and I don't know that it's happened yet in the world of what we call Jewish innovation, but it could happen. And I think that a story like this says that it's likely to happen, where at some future point, you start to get the internal fighting, right? And you say, what is look, this happened in the American Revolution. There were tremendous fights. I mean, the Hamilton is about this, right? The show Hamilton, that Thomas Alexander Hamilton. Actually, that's a pretty good pretty good mapping onto this, because Thomas Jefferson is Rabbi Yoshua, and Alexander Hamilton is Rabbi Eliezer. He's the more conservative revolutionary, right? And the whole point of Hamilton, or one of the points of Hamilton, is like, this is what happens. I mean, we first all together fighting the British, and then when that's over, we start to fight amongst ourselves. And that may just be human nature. And the question is kind of like, okay, well, if we knew that was going to happen, does that mean that we shouldn't have had the revolution? Meaning that, at the end of the day, Hamilton says, I regret, I should have been a Tory. I should have stopped this whole revolution, because the truth is that after it happened, it went Thomas Jefferson's way. And, right? Or does Hamilton say, which I think is what we think Hamilton says, like, well, it was good that we got away from England, but at the end of the day, it didn't turn out to be exactly my vision. But, some version of Nitzchuni Banani, Nitzchuni Chaverai, my friends defeated me, right?
I love that.
So that's one way to look at it. And I think it would be valuable to, I don't want to name names on this show, but I think it would be valuable to kind of, for folks out there listening, to sort of map this on to various characters in our day, and to think about what might happen in the future, what could happen in the present to avoid that future. If internal fighting is sort of inevitable, or not inevitable, is the usual, then maybe there's something that we can do now in our early Yavna days, before that point comes.
And I think one of the questions of this text that is left unanswered is it inevitable and necessary to get the Rabbi Eliezers out of the room?
Right.
Or is part of the story saying you actually need to keep him in the room? Yeah, we understand that unity or progress or getting everybody rowing in the same direction is important, but you don't take people out of the room, or actually you do need to. I'm not sure, but I think that's one of the questions of the text.
Well, and I think that'll connect very well to what I believe is the next text that we're going to do in 2 weeks, which has to do also with who's in the room and who's not in the room. So that's going to be a great connection. There's another way that I want to potentially look at Rabbi Eliezer, but I think it'll make sense more in the next part. So maybe let's move forward a little bit in the text.
Great.
And so I will share my screen again and say, okay, so they excommunicate Rabbi Eliezer. And then they said, who will go and inform him? all the rabbis are saying, who among us will go and tell him the bad news?
Yeah,
Rabbi,
at this point, Tova Hartman does an amazing analysis of this story. One of the things she points out is she's like, they're sheepish. It's like the next morning, and they're confident they did the right thing, but they're like, uh-oh, who's gonna, they have a certain ambivalence and maybe shame or fear about how are we going to do this. There really isn't a good way to do what we think is right. We think we did the right thing, but anyway, the emotion behind the who's going to tell him, I think is thicker than it even appears.
Well, I also want to connect that to something that you talked about a lot when we were studying a few weeks ago, I think in our first episode, when we were talking about the story of Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai and the whole idea that he saves Yavne but not Jerusalem, and that he basically creates a new Judaism, and on his deathbed he has questions, he wonders whether he did the right thing, and there's a version of that here. They've just in a way killed somebody, and now they're having some thoughts. Maybe we went a little too far, or maybe we did the right thing, but we still do have an ethical obligation to him. He's our teacher, he's our friend, but man, that's tough. And so so Rabbi Akiva says to them, I will go, lest someone unsuitable go and inform him, and he would end up destroying the entire world.
Okay, let's stop here for a minute.
Yeah, of course.
Oh my God, this line is so beautiful.
But wait, before we go to that line, I think I just want to make sure, Rabbi Akiva, I just want to point out that for two things about Rabbi Akiva going. Actually, there's three things. One is that he was Rabbi Eliezer's student. He was also Rabbi Joshua's
main student.
His main student, right? But number two, sort of the way that we think of Rabbi Akiva, he's even more progressive than Rabbi Joshua. He's even more, he's the most creative, the most, let's say, unbound of the rabbis, not of all the rabbis ever, but in this group of rabbis. And so the most radical, it's Bernie Sanders going to tell the bad news to Pete Buttigieg, right?
Yeah.
And
and Rabbi Akiva, I think it's really interesting that Rabbi Akiva is so opposite Rabbi Eliezer in his radicalness, in the way he approaches God in the tradition. He is infinitely creative, right, and willing to say that when the Torah says black, it really means white. When it says yes, it really meant no. And Rabbi Eliezer is like, what are you talking about? But that their teacher and student, I think, is really interesting.
Right, and and we'll explore all these things. But then the third point about Akiva is that he wasn't involved in the previous story, which I think is just worth pointing out. That he's not part of the previous story. So all of a sudden, where did he come from? But those are the three things I just want to point out about Rabbi Akiva, and then let's go to your reaction.
Yeah,
to this
and so of this idea that if someone informs him in a way that, I think the implication is that would be hurtful, although there's a larger question in this story, which is what's the hurtfulness that the story is naming? Is it Rabbi Eliezer's excommunication? Is it the way they handle the excommunication? I think that's an open question. But in any case, Rabbi Akiva knows that if someone informs him of his being banished in an overly hurtful way or an insensitive way, that can be that harm is tantamount to destroying the whole world. That hurting someone with words is so impactful, it's as if the whole world is destroyed. And it wasn't until I read your translation or your tweaking of the Steinsaltz translation that I connected the dots of the possibility. Now I think it's actually what the text means. And now where the text is actually now going back to that idea that the only gate to heaven, the only way to have God respond to us from our pleas to God is when we cry out from having been harmed from words. And now I realize that the fear isn't that we're going to destroy the world. It's that if we hurt Rabbi Eliezer, he will cry out in pain. And as a result of that, he will invoke God's retaliation and that will destroy the world. Anyway, I never really got the obvious actor actually in there.
Well, that's where, like, okay, so that's why I'm interested in what, because when you first started talking, it sounded to me like you were interpreting that story, that as a kind of a, like the Talmud talks about how if you kill one person, you've destroyed an entire world, and so like that,
right.
by hurting Rabbi Eliezer, we are killing, destroying the entire world, was your first take. And I read it
That's
in a much more literal way, which was Rabbi Eliezer is some kind of miraculous, powerful person, and maybe because God will listen to him, because God listens to the voices of those who've been wronged, but that he actually might have the power to physically destroy the world from his hurt, from his rage.
uh-huh.
Are you saying it's both? Are you saying
and I think now what's really going on is that Rabbi Akiva knows that one who cries out from having been harmed with words is heard by God, and God responds. And the response is going to be retaliation against those who did the hurting, or bigger. And that what Rabbi Akiva is saying is, if someone informs Rabbi Eliezer in an insensitive way, Rabbi Eliezer's pain will invoke God's destruction. Although I don't know why that destruction would be against the whole world and not simply against those who had hurt him. Why isn't it not against the one who informed him in an insensitive way, or against those rabbis around? There's something going on here.
Okay, well, but this is where I have a kind of I don't know, a school of hard knocks take on this, and also a different view of who Rabbi Eliezer is metaphorically than the one that I articulated earlier on this one, which is that the school of hard knocks one is that when somebody is hurt, they can potentially rage in a way that is incredibly destructive, not necessarily to the whole world, but but far beyond those who hurt that person. And so the idea that somebody who has been hurt, even if not wronged, even if the hurt was legitimate, was necessary. And I'm a little bit, I think this, what they did to him was extremely harsh, and yet I'm open to the idea that it was necessary, particularly in light of what I'm about to say. But I think that it's right, and message in a bottle, right? We've been talking about our ancestors sending us these messages in a bottle, these hidden messages. The wisdom, hard-won wisdom. That one of those is that a person who is hurt is going to be actually so hurt and outraged and enraged that they have a tremendous destructive power. And if you want to make sure that they don't act destructively, but nevertheless you have to do the harsh thing to them, you better make sure that you find a way to channel that incredible energy of rage and hurt, perhaps by sending somebody gentle to talk, whatever Akiva is doing here. So that's number one. That's the kind of easier one, the school of hard knocks. The other one is that I think it's this is where it really hit me, that there's another way to see the character of Rabbi Eliezer, that he does stand, like as a literary character, stands for something, that he does stand for the old Judaism, for the previous Judaism, meaning that in this look at it, he's not Pete Buttigieg, the conservative liberal, right? He is actually the embodiment of the old way. And what is basically happening here is that they just ignored God, right? They just said the old way, we are completely moving away from that. Rabbi Eliezer was the one who invoked God. And so Rabbi Eliezer stands for the person who's really still connected to the old way. And they're saying, we are moving away from that. And if you think about it, that is excommunication of the old way. It's saying we are putting that away. It is no longer part of us in any active way. We will remember it fondly. It was our teacher. And right, Rabbi Eliezer is Akiva's teacher. So it's not that I hate you, but it's that you are now, and we talked about Marie Kondo, right, thanking the things that have accompanied us up till now, but nevertheless saying you cannot accompany me on my journey any longer.
Yeah.
And so as a literary device, if we think of it as not a story, or if we understand that it's a story about people, but it's it's a representation of a relationship to the previous Judaism, that the idea that actually we burn it and leave it behind is, obviously we're not actually going to burn it. We don't want to burn it. But the idea is that we kind of say it's no longer relevant other than as a memory. And we might take some of those memories forward and build new things out of them. But the thing itself has no more power as itself. And that's where I think that there's, it kind of hit me that, well, part of me wants to see this as a story about the internecine warfare among the revolutionary class after the revolution is over. There's another valence of this that's extremely powerful, to see it as the maybe more obvious version of the interplay of the old and the new.
Okay, now you're raising something for me. I've always wondered how we're supposed to understand the fact that Rabbi Eliezer doesn't immediately resort to miracles and invoking God. The text says he brings every rational argument in the world, but they refuse to accept any of them. Certainly, the text doesn't show them objecting to the content of this argument or that argument, which it typically does. And now given what you're saying, I'm wondering if that was they needed Rabbi Eliezer to get to invoking the miracles. They had to make him that person completely in order to make the point you're making with the story, that it may be necessary to absolutely say no to the past. I don't know. There's something there. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I mean, I think so that now we have like two, and I think that, by the way, the part of the reason why I think that there's such genius in some of these texts, but again, I want to note, by the way, that I've said this before, my wife and I are doing the daily Talmud page, and I feel like there's a lot of non-genius in the Talmud. So I think it's a mixed bag, but some of these things are such genius, such incredible storytelling. Like, I also think can be found in the Torah, where you can also find some good stuff and some pretty not so good stuff. And a story like this, I think, is so subtle and so incredibly constructed that I think that it's actually right on both of those layers.
Yeah.
So
we're only a couple lines in. We better keep going.
Yeah, we better keep going. Okay, so then the text says, and what did Akiva do?
Yeah,
he wore black and wrapped himself in black and sat before Rabbi Eliezer at a distance of 4 cubits, which is the distance that you can't, I guess actually it's sort of like social distancing, so you have to say 6 feet. I mean, it's something that this is the rule about someone who's excommunicated. You can't be in their close physical proximity.
That's right.
And
I also want to point out, I think the beauty of these are rituals that are not only expected of those in relation to people who are essentially excommunicated, but they're also mourning. The
right.
Black is a mourning ritual. It's bringing up that idea that there is a loss, the loss of a life, and the way in which the tradition has us mourn for our 7 relatives: mother, father, sister, brother, husband, wife, child, and one other. And who's the one other person for whom you tear your garments and you do mourning rituals? For your primary teacher. And here's Rabbi Eliezer, experiencing this excommunication as the death of his primary teacher, and he's in mourning, personal mourning.
So then Rabbi Eliezer says to him, Akiva, and I'm not sure this translation is the best, but it says, Akiva, how is today different from other days? What is different about today from other days? In the Hebrew, it's ma yom me yomayim.
What's up with you?
Yeah, what's going on today? Something like that, right? Something
why
weird.
Why are you acting this way?
Yeah, like something is weird. And what's interesting, by the way, I wonder how that accords to the the traditional reading that Rabbi Eliezer was aware that they burned it in front of him. Maybe they didn't, and that would seem to be a little bit more kind. But here he just said, I lost this argument, goes back home to his wife, bad day at the office. But then the next day, Akiva shows up in black and obviously conducting himself in a way that I kind of understand something has happened here, and it's like, what's happening? What's going on?
Or he really knows, and he's like, Akiva, what are you doing? It's like, you know, really, you're taking their side. You're my student. What? I didn't expect this from you. I don't know. I don't know.
No, I think so. Then Rabbi Akiva said to him, "My master." I think that's in Hebrew, Rabbi.
Yeah.
Right. My master, my rabbi. It appears to me that colleagues are distancing themselves from you, or that it appears to me that the colleagues are distancing themselves from you.
Yeah.
At which point Rabbi Eliezer too rent his garments and removed his shoes, as is the custom of an excommunicated person. That's what Steinsaltz put. That's also the custom of a mourner.
Yeah, in this idea that your chaverim, your colleagues, are distancing themselves from you, is supposed to be understood, although it's never quite landed convincingly for me, that this is somehow a sensitive, nuanced, gentle way of saying, we're excommunicating you. It's like we're being withdrawn. We are withdrawing. I don't know. I've never been convinced that this is all that nice and gentle, but.
Well, there's also that part about it appears to me, like it's a little, you know, it seems a little wimpy. It appears to me. It's not, but maybe there's something to that. I mean, what was I thinking about not too long ago? But this idea that we have euphemisms. By the way, there's two euphemisms here, right? Because the first euphemism was that they blessed him, which meant that they excommunicated him, and now there's another, exactly a euphemism, but you know, a kind of a word hedge. By the way, then the fact that this is all about hurting with words, it's probably relevant to all that, right? That there's ways in which we know what's going on, but we still, is it a nice thing to not use the direct words, or is it a nice thing to be more direct?
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, and by the way, the euphemism of they blessed him, I've always understood to be self-censorship, so that the non-Jews who are reading the text wouldn't sort of see us washing our dirty laundry.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, there are things like that, by the way, also in the Torah, where, for example, in many cases, the Torah changes names of characters who were named with a version of the name Baal, the god Baal, in their name. So, for example, I think Saul's son, that's named, that his real name was Ish-Baal, a man of Baal, but the Bible changes it to Ish-Boshet, which is a man of shame, which they're both using it as an extra dig, but they're also, it's like they're not it's like he who must not be named kind of thing. So there's a lot of, there's precedent for this kind of thing. And again, is it clear, right? In that case, it's not clear that when they change his name from Ish-Baal to Ish-Boshet, that they're actually being kind, or they're being even meaner. And here, you know, here too, are the euphemisms, are they really kind, or are they even meaner? You know, are they even more, and again, if we're talking about these things as literary devices, where really Rabbi Eliezer isn't Rabbi Eliezer, he stands for the old Judaism, then I think it's a question of like, maybe it's kinder, maybe it's better, more right. This, if so, then I'm certainly guilty of the wrong. But maybe it's more right that if you have to do these things, if you have to leave the old Judaism behind, at least don't be so direct about it. You know, I mean, at least be a little more gentle about it. Maybe.
I don't know.
So Rabbi Eliezer tears his garments and removes his shoes, and drops from his seat and sat on the ground, again, similar to the customs of mourners. And tears fell from his eyes, and the entire world was afflicted. Meaning the tears, you know, his sadness, right? Tears fell from his eyes is not rage, it's sadness. Right. And the tears from it hurt, right? The tears from his eyes caused 1/3 of the olives are afflicted. I mean, basically don't grow, die, whatever. 1/3 of the wheat, 1/3 of the barley. And there are those who say that even dough kneaded in women's hands spoiled. You know, so some huge miraculous in a bad way, right?
You know what's jumping out at me that never did before, now that you're retelling it? The fact that Rabbi Eliezer accepts this banishment. You know, he takes off his shoes, he sits on the ground. These are the symbolic acts required of one who is banished. So he doesn't say like, F you, I'm just going to, you know, I'm going to start another whatever. I'm going to do whatever I want. I'm going to keep teaching. I'm going to redeclare, you know, he accepts the cease and desist order. I don't know.
He accepts it, and then the
Yeah.
next line is that the sages taught there was great rage on that day, as any place that Rabbi Eliezer fixed his gaze was burned. And even Rabban Gamliel, the head rabbi, he was coming on a boat at the time, and a large wave swelled over him and threatened to drown him. And he said, "It seems to me that this is only for the sake of Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus."
Okay, so let's remember that Rabban Gamliel, even though he wasn't named in the story up until this point, he was understood to be the head of the academy.
Mm-hmm.
And so the decision to banish or excommunicate Rabbi Eliezer was essentially his.
Right. Right.
Okay.
And the buck stops here, you know, even if it wasn't,
Yeah.
you know, I mean,
Yeah.
he was on a boat. I mean, that's interesting too. Like, first of all, where was he? Where was he coming from? By the way, it's very possible. I mean, I know in the book The Orchard, I don't remember if it's this specific story, but Rabban Gamliel goes to Rome to kind of plead the case of the Jews to the Romans, and so, you know, maybe he was doing. I mean, I don't know. I wonder if like there's some piece of the story that at some when we have more time we could explore. Like, is there some value to the story that Rabban Gamliel is actually on a boat, meaning that he's probably was away, and he probably, you know, and maybe it really is that the buck stops here. Maybe he knew, did he somehow know that this had happened, even though he wasn't there, but he knows that only Rabbi Eliezer has that kind of power. And again, I mean, from a literary standpoint, I would say, like, what does that stand for, right? I mean, I think so think about Rabban Gamliel is the head of the New Judaism, the head of the revolutionaries. He's George Washington. And something so terrible has just happened, and he knows that only Alexander Hamilton could have done such a thing, or only, you know, the British, probably more in this telling of the story. It's not the fighting among the revolutionaries version. It's the George Washington. There's something so terrible has happened. He knows it must be because of the British governor. Only the British governor could have had the power to, you know, cause all the lights of Boston to go off.
I don't know. I think it could be that Rabban Gamliel is trying to suppress, as we're going to see, he's trying to suppress the internal fighting. He's Mr. Unity. I don't know. Let's see. Let's see.
Okay, let's keep going. So,
by the way, there's something Jonah-ish about this story, right?
Very much. Right.
Yeah, he's on a boat. The big storm comes. He knows. Okay, right. I get why this is happening. I see my role in this. It's okay. Go ahead.
Okay, so Rabban Gamliel stands up and stood on his feet and said, "Master of the universe, it is revealed and known before you that it was not for my honor that I acted when excommunicating Rabbi Eliezer, nor was it for the honor of the house of my father that I acted." By the way, Rabban Gamliel is a direct descendant of Hillel the Elder, you know, arguably the founder of Rabbinic Judaism.
And King David.
And King David.
Yeah.
So, you know, so which exact, is he talking about Hillel? Is he talking about David? Is he talking about his actual father, who is, I believe, Rabban Shimon? But in any event, he's from a very prestigious lineage. So he's saying it's not for my own, it's not for my aggrandizement that I did this, and it's not for the aggrandizement of my family, of my status. I did this. I did this, and by the way, we say, like, did he really do it, or is he just taking responsibility? He was out of town, but he's taking responsibility. That may or may not matter. But he says, I did this for your honor, God, so that disputes will not proliferate in Israel. And that's what you said, that he's the great unifier.
Yeah, and I think the role of unity in the beginning of a new era is scary. And interesting. And for me, I think it's possible that the tradition is actually critiquing the impulse to unify in an early stage.
Or interesting, or I was thinking that it's an interesting kind of unity that achieves unity by throwing out the the troublemaker, especially when the troublemaker is not the most extreme, it's not Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. He's throwing out the old guy. He's throwing out and we've talked about in the, not on the air long ago, right? That there's a text that you teach a lot, and it's kind of like when the new people start calling the old people heretics,
right,
for doing what they were always doing for thousands of years, and now I'm a
right,
heretic.
right,
That's when you know that the tables have turned, and that's kind
right.
of what's going on here. So it's unity, but not by a compromise. It's actually unity by
Yeah.
throwing out the voice that we can't find a way to compromise with anymore.
Yes, and I think the tradition is going to be in a number of places in the Talmud, holding Rabban Gamliel to critique for that approach. Okay, well,
Okay.
and maybe this story is the prime example, because we're going to see what happens to
Yeah,
him.
right. So in response, the sea calmed from its raging. Now, Ima Shalom, the wife of Rabbi Eliezer and the sister of Rabban Gamliel, so she is now at home with her husband Rabbi Eliezer, and the Talmud says that Ima Shalom, the wife of Rabbi Eliezer and the sister of Rabban Gamliel, from that incident forward, she would not allow Rabbi Eliezer to fall on his face, meaning to pray in anguish.
Okay,
she just stood guard to stop him, keep him in his chair.
Right. Just a couple things to point out. This is one of the few places you have a named female character, which is interesting all by itself. And in this case, she's the character in the story who actually is the most, she's holding a tradition, as we're going to see at the end, that explains what's going on in the story. Something that presumably Rabbi Eliezer doesn't know, and he asks her, how do you know what's going on here? So she's this very well-educated named female character,
and keep in mind that she is from the same lineage. She's the descendant of Hillel and of King David.
Absolutely, as Rabbi Gamliel's sister, absolutely. And what's going on here is that there's a certain prayer in the morning and the afternoon service called Tachanun, and it's a very emotional pouring out kind of prayer. You lay your head on your arm, and there are words that help you begin to get at what's hurting you, and then it's encouraging you to just cry out from all the very real life stuff going on in your personal life. It's the opportunity to really access your pain and get it out. And she doesn't want her husband, Rabbi Eliezer, to have the opportunity to do that particular prayer. And the halacha is that if you become interrupted between the previous prayer and this prayer, you lose your opportunity to do this outpouring prayer. So she keeps wanting to interrupt him before he can say this prayer, so he can't lay his hand on his arm and do that anguish pouring out prayer, because she knows what's going to happen, because she knows the Gemara better than we do. In other words, she knows that tradition. All the gates of heaven are locked except for the gates of anguish from hurt. Okay, go ahead.
Right. Okay, so I think let's make sure that let's read the rest of the text, and then we'll have a few minutes to discuss, and then this is going to come back. But, just to make sure that we get through the text before the end, let's just read through it all, and then we'll do what we can. So a certain day, it was a certain day around the time of the new moon, and she inadvertently substituted a full 30-day month for a deficient 29-day month, meaning she was mistaken as to what day it was. Basically, she thought it was Rosh Chodesh, the new moon, and that's a day where you don't say this Tachanun prayer. And so she thought, so some say a pauper came and stood at the door, and she took bread out to him, meaning she thought this was the day. Rabbi Eliezer, he's such a conservative. Of course, he wouldn't say Tachanun on the day of Rosh Chodesh. So the pauper comes to the door. It's fine for me to go and bring him some food, which is, of course, a great mitzvah, a great good deed.
Right.
And when she returned, she found that he had fallen on his face. So in this case, he knew better than her what day it was. She knew better than him the rules, certain things she had gotten from her family, but he was right about the date, and he did say Tachanun. And she said to him, "Arise, get up, you've killed my brother." Rabban Gamliel. Just then, the sound of the shofar emerged from the house of Rabban Gamliel to announce that he had died. I mean, it's powerful. Yeah. I mean, chilling. Rabbi Eliezer said to her, "From where did you know? How did you know that your brother would die?" She said to him, "This is the tradition that I received from the house of my father, of the father of my father." All the which the father of her father, if that's literal, that's the first Rabban Gamliel, but maybe it's not literal. All the gates of heaven are locked, except for the gates of prayer by victims of verbal wrongdoing. So the implication is that Rabbi Eliezer is a victim of verbal wrongdoing, that he was wronged. And because of his having been wronged, he receives this great power to destroy. So what do you make of it?
Oh my God. This is where I began. There are so many layers that to say one seems to imply that the others aren't really what it's about. It's about so many things. So on its surface, I think it's problematizing the simplicity that the first part of the story presents, which is sort of the shift in our history from listening to God to we've now grown up and we don't need to listen to God. And the heroes of that part of the story are the ones who kick God out of the conversation. And to kick God out of the conversation is to kick God's sort of mouthpieces, is to kick the Rabbi Eliezers out. And maybe this second part of the story is saying, but not so fast. Know what that's going to cost you.
Yeah.
And not just in terms of hurting people, because it's hard to do that and people will inevitably be hurt, but know the cost of cutting anyone out of the conversation.
Right.
I'm not sure if it's saying you don't do that, but it's a costly move.
Right. I part of me feels like it's, I mean, that it is that, well, I think it could be both. It could be either. And part of me feels like the answer, I'm not sure. I part of me reads this as you don't do that. I want to be really clear in how I read these texts, because we've said it a million times, but I want to be super clear that I believe that wisdom is what we learn through the school of hard knocks. But when we learn it through the school of hard knocks, it's too late. And when we learn something through the school of hard knocks and it's too late, we take on a sacred duty to pass that wisdom along to our children and to others so that they don't make the same mistakes that we did. And so, and I believe that these stories are the authors of these stories, in this case, some rabbis in the early, in the first few hundred years of the Common Era, that learned something tough. They learned a tough lesson and they wanted to send it to us. And so we're, and this is the tragedy of only teaching the first part of this story, because that first part of the story is trotted out all the time, like, hey, we could do whatever we want, right? And I read it that way, and I don't think it's wrong to read it that way. But at the same time, there's this other second part of the story, and it says, it says a bunch of things, right? First of all, be careful because there's people involved. Number two is, it says, if you harm people, or actually, I don't think it's only people. I think it's also that systems have power, especially ancient old systems. If you just dismiss like that, then that system is going to have a what do you call it? Like an echo, not an echo, but like every action has an opposite and equal reaction, a reverberation, but I'm looking for a different word. When it like a ricochet effect, right? When you shoot a gun at the wall and like bounces back to you, right? That if you act callously, cavalierly, too smartly towards this ancient, powerful thing, that it's going to come back to bite you. And in this case, right, the head of the new is killed because the old was not properly dealt with. And so I think that I think it would be a misreading of this text to say, and therefore they shouldn't have done that in the first place, and therefore they should have listened to God. You could read it that way, and that would undo the entire liberal Jewish world's use of this text. But I don't think that that's the right way to read it. but I think the right way to read, because God does laugh, right? God does say, my children have
Mhm.
defeated me. So it seems to me that means that the text is saying that was the right outcome, but it was mishandled and caused incredible harm to the new itself, could have even killed the new, right? I mean, could have destroyed the world, could have killed it. So maybe by the skin of its teeth, the new made it through this, but that this could have been the story about how the old and the new were killed in the same
Wow.
interaction.
Wow.
So
I think that's a great note.
yeah, but it's a story of such power. Meaning, I just, yeah, we're out of time, but I think it'll reconnect to the story that we want to do. I think in 2 weeks, which is an earlier story, obviously, of when Rabban Gamliel was thrown out of his position.
Yeah.
And we'll keep this going because they're both powerful stories. But I think you're right. It's the right note to end on, and we're out of time. And yet I hope everybody watching this and listening to this will spend some time over the next week with this story, because it's so powerful and it has so much to instruct us, I think.
Yeah.
So
thank you so much.
Thank you, Bene.
So fun.
This is so fun, and we were doing something the other day. We were doing this program together, and somebody said, "Oh, it's so great that you're willing to do this together." I'm like, you're my chavruta in life. Like we'll do anything together. This is great. And I would say that, and just to remind folks that next week we're doing a conversation with Barry Wimpheimer, the author of the book, The Talmud, a Biography. So it's another exciting opportunity to get more like sort of background understanding of what the Talmud is and what's going on. And we'd love to get feedback from folks. Is this working? We hope this is working on multiple levels for folks who haven't really encountered the Talmud, that this is a valuable experience, and also for folks who are very into Talmud, that it is. And if that's any different than what we're trying to do, please let us know. Send us an email, and or otherwise just send us a note, and we're building this as we go.
We hope other people are having fun besides just you and me.
Yeah, that's right.
All right, and we are live. So welcome everyone to Nigun Seminar. It's so wonderful to be with you again. Thanks for joining. To those of you who are new.
But I think if you're having fun, we're having fun, other people are having fun.
I hope so.
All right, see you soon.
Thanks.
Seminar where we take a little lunch break, just half an hour. We learn one nigun, one melody from a guest teacher. And oh goodness, hold on a second. Vimeo playing back to me. It was a bizarre experience. All right. So again, this is Nigun Seminar. We're going to spend half an hour together, learn one Nigun from our guest teacher today. I'm going to hand it over in a moment to my co-host, Jackson Mercer, who's my fellow student at Hebrew College and a talented musician in his own right. And Jackson is going to lead us through today's seminar. He's going to be the learner as a reminder. So as Jessica Kate Meyer, our guest, teaches us a nigun today, Jackson is gonna be your voice. You're all gonna be on mute. So if you feel comfortable, a reminder to please turn on your faces for us so that Jackson doesn't feel so alone when he's singing and can't hear you, although you will always be singing with him. All right, and with that, I'm gonna turn it over to Jackson.
Perfect, thank you, Shani. I want to start by being totally honest. I have always thought that Jessica Kate Meyer was the coolest person ever. And then she came to the kitchen, which when the kitchen was just kind of getting started, I had the unique pleasure to be like the daycare associate and got to hang out in the corner. So I have very fond memories of being at the kitchen. And to me, it was like a melding of amazing people all coming together in the same place. So for me, this is a very unique joy to be able to share with you this amazing teacher who has a tremendous, expansive knowledge of beauty and nigunim. So Jess is going to tell us a little bit about this nigun that she's going to share with us, and we're all going to learn it together. And I'm going to unmute her.
Hi, it's wonderful to be here. And Jackson and Shani, really a joy to be with the two of you and with this group of lunchtime nigun singers. In my case, it's more brunch time out in California. So I was really inspired because I listened to last week's session with our teacher, Rabbi Nehemiah Poland, and this genre of nigun stories. And immediately I thought of this very special nigun that comes with a really deep legend, and I wanted to share it today. So my relationship with this nigun begins in 2012 when I was spending a lot of time in Budapest in Hungary. And every Jewish space I was in, and I was in a lot of Jewish spaces in Budapest, I kept hearing this nigun over and over and over, and it haunted me. It goes like this. And that's the whole nigun. And when I heard it, and I heard it over and over, I said, where is that haunting nigun from? And this is the story that I learned. It was around 1780. And the first Kalaver Rebbe, Yitzhak Taub, had just moved to the town of Nagykalo in northeastern Hungary. And he would walk in the fields to take in this new environment he found himself in. And he would often hear the shepherds in the fields singing tunes, because when you're a shepherd, you've got to sing to your sheep. So one day he was walking and he heard the shepherds singing this haunting melody. And he said, I have to learn this melody. Only when he heard it that time, he heard it with Hungarian words. And while I'm not going to make you learn these Hungarian words, I'm going to try and sing them. And for those who speak Hungarian, I'm sorry. I'm trying. Szólak a koszmár, majd megvirjad már, zöld erdőben, sík mezőben, sítal egy madár. Zöld erdőben, sík mezőben, sítal egy madár. And those words in Hungarian mean, the rooster is crowing, soon it will be daylight. In a green forest, in a smooth meadow, a bird is strolling. So as the Rebbe, Rabbi Yitzchak Taub, heard this melody and these words, he ran over to the shepherd and he said, please, please, please teach me this melody. How much do you want for it? Because as nigun stories go, you always have to pay if you want to learn a nigun, because musicians must be paid for their music. So the shepherd said, give me 2 florins and I'll teach you this melody. So he paid him 2 florins, and the shepherd taught him the melody and the words. And as the legend has it, as the shepherd was teaching the melody and the words, he forgot them. And the Rebbe remembered them. And from that moment on, it became a nigun, and it became one of the central nigunim of the Jews of Hungary, and in particular, the Kalaver Hasidim. And the Rebbe added some words in Hebrew. And what's fascinating about this story is, so it goes on, and we've had the rooster, we're in the green forest, there's a bird strolling, and we learn about what kind of bird is this? What kind of bird is this? Its feet are yellow, its wings are blue, and it is waiting for me. Wait, bird, wait for me. Always wait for me. If God said that I will be yours, then I will be yours. So then, for the Rebbe, what he did was he said, this bird is redemption. This bird is Mashiach and Olam Haba. And right now, when we're all in Galut, we're all in extreme exile, we are dreaming of this bird with the yellow feet and blue wings. And we're saying, please wait for us. We're coming to you just as you're coming to us. So he added the words, when will this be? When will we be reunited, bird? Yibonei Beis Hamikdash. Ir Tzion Timale. When the temple is rebuilt and Ir Tzion and the city of Zion is reconstituted, then we will be together again. I also want to say it's fascinating because often, to portray Mashiach, to portray redemption as this bird, because so often Israel, we are portrayed as the bird, this wandering bird who is looking for a home and is never able to rest, or Yonat Rechokim, this sort of far away dove who loses its voice. So often the bird is seen as this sad portrait of Jews in exile, but then to reimagine the bird as redemption, that there's something in the flight, even as right now it feels like this is where we can't put our feet down, we can't ground, but there's actually something in the flight of the bird that's calling to us that is redemption itself. There's an end to the story, but first we got to learn the nigun. Jackson, do we start? What do we do now?
Let's go line by line.
Okay.
You said you picked the easy one of the nigun, but this is also very challenging nigun. So
We'll
go
break it
slow.
down. Okay.
Yeah, for everyone.
And no Hungarian, sort of.
Please no.
Ooh. Try that. One more note I would add in. Ooh, sorry. Yeah, 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 la, la, yeah.
Yai, lai, lai.
Close. Yeah, 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 yeah.
Yai.
Almost. Okay, so I'm going to sing it with the words just to give it. Sola kokosh. So, yeah. Try that. Beautiful. We'll try. I'll sing it again and repeat after me. Yeah, 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 yo. And you can slide up to that last one. You know what's amazing? I'm so glad because Jackson, I think of you, you're this like the tremendous song leader who I think of like you just pick up a nigun. So if you're like tripping in one moment,
Really
that gives me like, because I always, once we get a nigun in our head, it's hard to unlearn the way we think we hear it. That's always my thing. So there's one note which is yeah, 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 yeah. Yes. And you then beautiful. We're going to try the first two lines together, phrases. Yeah, 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 yeah. Beautiful. Are you guys, should we do that much again or should we go into the third? Okay.
Let's try it again.
And I'll also say that first line, like this is a very fluid nigun. There are some nigunim where it's like precise, you have to be exact. And there are some nigunim and where there's really a lot of room for juicy interpretation by the singer. And this is one of them. So I would say even the most simple rendition of that first line would be, yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, exactly. And then I'm just adding, yeah, mama, yeah. But you can do it either way. So let's do those first two lines together. I'll do it the most pared down way. Yeah, yeah. Oh, so beautiful. Yeah, 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 yeah. Try that. Beautiful. Let's do it again. Yeah, 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 yeah. Try that. Perfect. So everybody know we're not going, yeah, 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 yeah. We're not doing that or anything like that. We're doing, yeah, yeah, my, yeah. Because, yeah, we're sneaking into Fraigish for those who want musical terms. Fraigish in Yiddish, Hijaz in Arabic, Ahavarabah in Hebrew. So, yeah, yeah, my, yeah, yeah, my, yeah. And you can either do it in the more pared down way, which would be yeah, yeah, my, yeah, yeah, yeah. And then you can also play with it and yeah, yeah, my, yeah, yeah, my, yeah, yeah. But pared down, yeah, yeah, my, yeah, yeah, yeah. So I'm gonna do that the second big block, and this is it. That's the whole thing. So yeah, la la, yeah, 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 my, yeah, yeah, yeah. Beautiful. Let's do it again. Yeah, yeah, la, yeah. Oh, yeah, 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 yeah. Oh, yeah, my, yeah, yeah, yeah. Beautiful. Let's take it the whole thing from the beginning. Should we keep breaking it down or try the whole thing once through?
Yeah, let's try can we try the second part one more time?
Sure. Tough. And also that full second part repeats.
Oh.
At the end. So it's good that we're doing it again. Yeah, yeah, oh, yeah, 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 oh, yeah, my, yeah, yeah, yeah. Beautiful. And I love the way the two of you have framed this. So like in this musical conversation, because also you can hear belive, as they say in Ivrit, right in the moment, you can hear how a melody is also evolving. And so like when I hear it in your voice, I'm hearing new things in the melody that I'd never heard before. And even though you're doing it like you're getting it technically exactly right, it's like I'm hearing new things, and like to hear that in conversation is a real treat. So from the beginning. And should we do this all together? Should we sing this one together? I mean,
let's try it one time all the way through.
Okay. And it repeats.
That was beautiful. Can you start me off? Because I think that's my hard part.
Oh, yeah. So you can either do the or you can do mom.
Let's try that all together.
Okay.
Where does it go? Ay, da, 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 ay, da, da, ay, da, da, do.
And then that repeats.
Ay, da, 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 ay, da, da, ay, da, da, da. Can we review those last few notes?
Yeah, of course. And
Those
I
are
would just
hard.
say what you just did was totally legit. Like it was just like you just brought your you-ness to that nigun and infused it. What's your Hebrew name?
Yaakov Nachshon.
Ah, okay. Well, it's full of Yaakov Nachshonness now. Yay, yay, oh, yay, oh, yay.
Ay, da, 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 ay, da, 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 ay.
Yay.
That's the one.
Yeah, so so yay, la, la, yay. And then it's like, oh no, oh yay, and then hi, yay.
That's perfect. Can we sing through it like once and twice?
Oh yeah.
Great. That'd be perfect.
And maybe we could even try Yibone Hamikdash if that's the second part, and we can put in Yibone Hamikdash, Ir Tzion Timale. Maybe Shani, can you put this in the chat box? So it's Yibone Hamikdash, Ir Tzion Timale. So it'll go like this. Yevone beis hamikdash, ir Tzion timale. Oh, Yibone beis hamikdash, ir Tzion timale. Oh, Yeah, yeah, la, yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah, my, yeah, yeah, yeah. Yibonei Beis Hamikdash, Ir Tzion Timalei, oh, Yamaya, Yamaya. And if redemption to you looks more like a yeshiva than a temple, Yibonei Beis Hamidrash, Ir Tzion Timalei, oh, Yamaya, yeah, yeah, la, yeah, oh, yeah, 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 oh, yeah, my, yeah, yeah, yeah. And I see we have very little time, so I want to finish the story because there's a tag. It was almost 2 years ago exactly, and I was officiating at a wedding, and the sister-in-law of the bride is an amazing Bostonian, Edith Klein, who's the executive director of Keshet, which is an organization based in Boston but working nationally. And I had always wanted to meet her, and I finally was getting to meet her in person at this wedding. And somehow we got started talking, I don't know why, about Koliver Hasidim, or about Hungary. And she said to me, the Koliver Rebbe, the first Koliver Rebbe, Itzhak Taub, was my great, 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 great grandfather. And the way that she heard the story in her family was that he was a shepherd, that Yitzhak Taub, as a young man, was a shepherd. And he had heard this song, he learned it from one of his shepherd colleagues. And then he brought it, and he hadn't even become a Rebbe yet, he was still shepherding. But he had this melody from when he was a shepherd, when he was in a more secular interfaith context, and he brought it with him to his Hasidim.
Jessica, thank you so much. That was so sweet. Can we sing it one more time? Just
Yeah.
Because now we have that story, and now I think that we can hold all of that all together now.
Great. Yo, yeah, 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 oh, yeah, 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 la, yeah, oh, yeah, 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 oh, yeah, my, yeah, 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 la, yeah, oh, yeah, 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 my, yeah, my, oh, hey, yeah, oh, yeah, 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 la, yeah, oh, yeah, 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 oh, yeah, my, yeah, my, yeah, yeah, la, yeah, oh, yeah, my, yeah, oh, yeah, my, my, Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica.
Thank you, Jessica.
Thank you so much, Jessica.
Thank you.
And you can find the recording of this Nigun seminar if you want to hear it again while you're cooking for Shabbat or review at Jewish Live. Yes, Jessica.
I'm also putting in the chat box one of my favorite recordings by a contemporary Hungarian singer. She's singing it with a Sephardic trio. Oops, I just sent it privately to someone accidentally. Here we go. We're putting it in the chat box. Yeah. So her name is Paya Bea, and she's singing it. You can find the link there.
Amazing. Thank you so much, and see everyone next week. Have a
Thank
Shabbat
you.
Shalom.
Thank you both. Thank you all.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Nice to see you.